welcome to the Only Football Podcast. My name is Kyle, and we have some exciting news. When me and Rick first started this podcast, it was probably only our third episode that the NFL released its schedule. And it kind of, feels in a way like a anniversary year because we found out. Now look, in the past, we have known 3 weeks ahead of time when the NFL was going to release their schedule. So today, the NFL 7 hours ago said that the schedule will be released on Thursday. And you may be asking, why are you clapping? Well, I'm clapping because for NFL fans around the world, this schedule release is a big deal. If you haven't seen Fever Pitch with Drew Barrymore and I think Jimmy Fallon, go check it out. He gets all of his boys together and they have a big party because it's the day that you know who you're going to play. Not only that, you can buy tickets to the games. If you're a season ticket holder, they send you the season tickets in the mail. You smell the tickets, and you know what it smells like? A clean slate. Everybody's undefeated, but who will be the opponents? Now we have the opponents, excuse me. Who will play when and where is the real question to be answered. And we like to have fun and try to guess ourselves who's going to be played. But I do have some leaks here. I know the international games in Germany. And the reason that that news is out there is because on the NFL side, they're holding this information really close. But on Germany's side, if you look at the stadium that the game is happening and you look under events, it flat out says what team is playing on that day. So that was one of the leaks that did happen. Now, that game, according to this leak and the website of Germany, and by the way, last year, there was a lot of leaks that came out, and I will say they were all true. I didn't have a single leak that came out last year that didn't end up being true, including the Broncos playing the Seahawks week 1. So, this is what it's going to be. The Saints are going to face off against the Patriots in November in Germany, either on the 12th or the 19th. This will be the second ever season that Germany has debuted an NFL football game. So this is going to be really exciting. The Saints were in Europe last year. The Saints pulled out all the stops to turn the trip into a win. The NFL only foots the bill on travel, hotel accommodations, and the storage of equipment for a limited period of time. The lodging, for instance, is paid for the weekend by the league. So I didn't realize that. Anywhere else that you go to a football game, no questions asked, the league covers everything. But there are some things that the league doesn't pay for on these international games. That's a total sidebar. That's not really important. What is important, the Saints are playing the Patriots in Germany this year. And can I just be the first person to officially say, I won't be the first person, but I'm going to say it. Why does Germany keep getting the most bland NFL games? I mean, they got Tom Brady last year, which, by the way, anytime you can send Tom Brady to Germany, imagine how many people were waiting their whole life. And, Tom Brady's last year, it was possible that they could see him live in action. And I'm sure that was a big deal. But the Bucks were what they were. I mean, they weren't great, but they weren't like terrible. They won a very, very weak division. They didn't even have a winning record by the end of the year. So they didn't really get a fantastic game. And then for a long time, all the games that were in London, they kept sending Jacksonville over there. And part of me just probably felt like as a fan in London, they were probably wondering, why do they keep sending Jacksonville? We don't want to see Jacksonville and the Titans play again. No, Jacksonville's playing Houston. We don't care. Can we get like Chiefs and Bengals in Germany? And, it just never seems to go that way. So that isn't the only game that we know about. So Peter King, who used to be a lot more involved in having an ear inside of the NFL, different teams. He was a person that would say, "Oh, this guy's talking to this guy." Kareem Hunt's talking to the Broncos. He was an insider for teams for many years. Now he's more into the commentary aspect of the league. So I was a little surprised to see Peter King, the one that reported this. But according to Peter King, he said it is very likely that the Giants will face the Eagles on Black Friday, a game that will be broadcasted on Amazon Prime. He noted that it was not set in stone, but very likely. So there is another game. I know we have Bill, who's a fan of this channel, who is a big Giants fan. The Eagles, you're going to have to play them twice, unfortunately. Here is another interesting one because for a long time, I saw Denver get one primetime game a year, and usually, like in 2020, 2021, it was against the Cleveland Browns on Thursday night. I mean, gross, right? As a Bronco fan, it's like, and in that game, they didn't even have their starting quarterback, who I believe was still Baker Mayfield, and in came Case Keenum into that game. So you had like Case Keenum versus Teddy Bridgewater. I mean, look, that game does not sound attractive. But then the Russell Wilson trade happened, and we had more primetime games than I would like to admit, because every time the Broncos, embarrassed themselves, they did it in front of a national audience. So much so that the NFL actually flexed them out of a Sunday night football game last year towards the end of the season in December. And not just any game. This was a Patrick Mahomes Sunday night football game in Arrowhead, right? I mean, look, you got to be pretty bad to get flexed out of a game with the Chiefs. But that's what happened. So, look, I understand that if you're not an exciting team, they don't want to put you on a national stage. But after the Russell Wilson trade, you get a lot of primetime games. And that's just part of what comes with getting an elite talent. And that's why they pay these quarterbacks so much money, because they bring so much revenue into the city, ticket sales, the NFL, paying the city, merchandise, etc. Aaron Rodgers joining the Jets is doing a very similar thing, okay? The Jets had just one primetime game last year against the Jaguars, which we live streamed here, and the Jaguars won that game. The Jets played really bad. They benched Zach Wilson, but then they said they didn't bench him, but they actually did bench him. And at this point, the Jets were past their winning streak, and they were on a 3 or 4 game slide. And they really needed this game because it was towards the end of the year. But so did Jacksonville, because they needed to win the division. Tennessee still had a game lead, I believe, at this point. So this game was really exciting. Unfortunately, the Jets just didn't put a good show on, and the Jaguars won. That was the Jets' only primetime game last year. This year, now that Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback of New York, they are expected to become primetime darlings. They are looking at 6 total primetime games. And that comes from Adam Schefter. So if you don't like seeing the Jets on national TV, I know a lot of people, they don't like the Jets, man. They're one of those teams that people don't like. It's like the Patriots. Gear up, because it's going to be a tough season for you. So that's not so much a actual like schedule leak as, it is just information about what to expect. So I was watching Colin Cowherd earlier today, and normally when I watch his show, I end up wanting to interject really bad on most of the topics that he discusses. And the schedule today or the topic today that I wanted to interject on, he was talking about Atlanta. And he was going over, he made it very obvious. He said, look, These are not my predictions. I'm just letting you know what Vegas has the teams at. And he's talking about the over-under. By the way, Tyler Fink is in the chat. Chiefs, Jets is the opener we all want to see on opening night in Kansas City. And that would be a really, really good matchup right there. Chiefs, Jets, opening game. We learned last year Roger Goodell has no mercy when it comes to new quarterbacks going to a new place. First game ever for Russell Wilson at Seattle. So very possible. Although this game doesn't have as much emotional ties as the one previously mentioned, I still think that will be a good game. I just don't think it's going to be the first game, but it's a great prediction. And I'm always wrong about guessing these games. So, so Colin Cowherd was going through all the games. He said, look, this isn't me predicting. I'm just telling you what the projected total win is for each team. Okay. And I'm going to go through some of them really quick. Okay. Atlanta Falcons were projected 7.4 wins. And Colin and his co-host were both wondering, what is it? Is there something that I'm not understanding? Is there something that I'm missing? And they kind of went back and forth about how Atlanta is, not going to win that many games. And they were looking for some kind of reason that they're missing, that Atlanta is projected that many wins in the first place. And I thought about it and I thought, well, it does make sense because you did see Trey Flowers, the cornerback, get signed to a 1-year contract. Okay. And then that was the big signing that happened in May. And then that May 1st, they signed a bunch of players and they're going to compete for jobs. But then they released Casey Hayward Jr. Okay. And here we go. Once we got into March, though, this is when some of the buzz started because Calais Campbell, who was playing for the Jets, signed a 1-year deal with the Falcons. And a lot of guys, when they get traded, they go up into the press conference and they say, all the right things. They're at a new place. Nobody wants to be like, yeah, I play for a bad team. They all want to say, I have a lot of faith in this group, etc. So Calais Campbell, though, he went a little past that. And he was saying, I think that this team is going to shock a lot of people. And I thought about last year. And I said, well, you know what? Last year, Atlanta was shocking a lot of people, through that first 5 games. The biggest one that stands out to me is they were running the football really well. They were getting like 200 yards, 270. They were getting ridiculous numbers on the ground. And Arthur Smith was just dialing up a lot of different ways to run the football. And Atlanta was winning games by just pounding the ball and playing solid defense. They weren't flashy. They lost a lot of close games, but they were there. And that's kind of one of the tell signs of where you're at as a team. If every week you're getting beat and it's ugly, okay? I look at those losses a lot different than if every single week, they got that last second field goal. Think about the 2021 Detroit Lions. Justin Tucker kicking the 65-yarder. Dan Campbell crying in the post conference because it just felt like what could go wrong did go wrong. And the Lions were playing so hard, but it just wasn't, it wasn't working. And they just had to stay the course and trust themselves and not blow the whole thing up. And they didn't. And then they got, I believe, the second easiest schedule in the NFL. And I told everybody on this channel, I said, Detroit is going to surprise a lot of people. Whenever you go from, being in these really close games and then your schedule gets favorably easier all the way up to number 2, I'm sorry, but I'm going to say that those are a lot more W's, okay? So Atlanta looks pretty good, but here's the deal. They have the second ranked easiest schedule in the NFL next season. That's the kicker, okay? That is the kicker. And really quick, I'm going to pull up the point differential of the NFL teams last year, and I'm going to see what their point differential is. Here we go. So here, I'm going to organize it. So point differential. Okay, so it starts with the 49ers 173, which means basically if you don't know what point differential is, you just, let's say you win a game 40-20, you're plus 20. Okay, that's the point differential, and it adds every week. So by the end of the season, you can see teams that won a lot of games, and then you can see, but they won by a lot. For instance, another team that won a lot of games was Minnesota. Minnesota, guess what their point differential was? -3, which means if you add up all of their points and all the points their opponents scored, they're actually -3. They're the first team ever to win 12 games with a negative point differential. And I find that stat mind-boggling, right? Because that means they barely won their close games, and then they got beat, pretty bad on a couple games to make up for the games that they won by maybe more than a possession, okay? But look at this. Atlanta Falcons were -21, okay? Do you know who's right in that area? The Commanders were -22, okay? The Raiders were -23. The Jets were -20, okay? So the Jets and the Falcons had an identical point differential. But if you look at, now I'm going to do 2021 strength of schedule, okay? Because don't forget, the Jets got off to a pretty hot start. I believe they were what? I think they went 6-0, 5-0. I think they were 7-1 at one point. So the 2021 strength of schedule, since we're comparing really right now, we're comparing the Jets and Falcons. The team, okay, here they are. The Falcons had, wow. The Jets had the 21st hardest schedule in the league last year, okay? Atlanta was 19. So look, Atlanta and New York Jets had a very similar strength of schedule last year. The point differential by the end of the season is only 1 point different. So for what it's worth, even though the Jets got off to that 7-1 start, they were no different than the Atlanta Falcons last season. That is something that pure stats will tell you. And I know that Atlanta's not fun, and there's no Sauce Gardner, and there's no Garrett Wilson, and they're not a real sexy team at this point, but they won a lot of those games in the trenches. They didn't get, I believe, the respect that they were due. And now you look at the schedule this year and the strength of schedule for the year coming up, and you got them ranked second. Atlanta has the second easiest schedule in the league this upcoming year. And yeah, I do think that is going to result in some wins, just like he did for the Lions, and just like it does for any team that played hard, close games, and now they're going to get an easy cake schedule. So their projected win total by Vegas is 7.5, 7.4. Guess what? I like it. I think that is a very realistic number for Atlanta. And this morning on The Herd, you had Colin Cowherd and his co-host just arguing about why is Atlanta favored 7 games? Why is Atlanta favored to win 7 games? Nobody bothered to mention any of the additions they made. The fact that they had Tyler Algier had over 1,000 yards rushing last season. Mind you, this was already one of the highest running football teams in the league. Okay. And now they just added Bijan from Texas. Okay, so they are just kind of capitalizing on what they do. They're bringing in another weapon to just, there's no surprise with Atlanta. Okay, they're going to run the football. They're going to have two running back sets, I believe, and they're going to run it and run it and run it. That's why they haven't even addressed their quarterback. Um, Rittler, whatever his name is, I don't even think he's going to be the quarterback week one. I think it's going to be not Chad Henne. He retired, actually, by the way. I don't know if you guys heard about that. It's going to be Tyler Heinicke. Tyler Heinicke, whatever. He is with Atlanta now, and I think he's going to win that battle. And I think that the Atlanta Falcons are going to be a lot like the Commanders were last year, this year. They're not quite there yet. And look, I think they were smart for not addressing the quarterback situation, because all the teams that are going to be bad this year, let's say Houston is still going to be really bad. Let's say they have a ways to go. They're not going to take a quarterback with, Bryce Young. They have Bryce Young. Say the Colts aren't really good. I don't know if they would take a quarterback. Anthony Richardson is supposed to be a project, so that's your guy for the next 3 years. Okay. And then you look at Carolina. I think Carolina is going to surprise a lot of people. They got a real coach in that knows how to win playoff games, that knows how to work with the quarterback. But let's say they still, and look, Carolina's the number 3 easiest schedule in the league. So they're going to win, I would say, about the same amount as Atlanta. And but if they have a quarterback in the draft next year that comes up, they're with CJ Stroud now. The Bears are with Justin Fields. Okay. And we already said the Colts, we already said Houston. Tennessee, they potentially are going to be the team that takes a quarterback. Detroit drafted, some people believe, is the best quarterback in the draft, but he had an injury out of Tennessee. So I don't believe that they would go quarterback. Jacksonville has their quarterback until our kids, move out of the house. San Francisco, we'll see how Brock Purdy does, but between Brock Purdy and Trey Lance, I feel like they got what they need there. Pittsburgh's got Kenny Pickett. I think they're rolling with that. So Green Bay, we'll find out about Jordan Love. Tampa Bay, we'll see if Baker can prove that he deserves to be a starter. I do see Tampa as the team that comes in last in this week NFC division with the Saints and the Falcons, Panthers. I do think Tampa probably comes in last in that division. Cleveland's got hand job. And Cincinnati's got Joe Burrow. And now look, the rest of these teams, besides the Rams, all have their quarterback. So when I look at the draft class coming up, the quarterbacks are really good. We all know that. There's going to be more hype about the quarterback draft class next year than there was this year. But I do think there's going to be less teams looking for a quarterback. So this is really, really good news for Atlanta. And I think that's why they didn't go after one. I think that's why they got, Bijan from Texas instead of getting a guy like Will Levis that was on the board, because they're not like, why start a project and then if he doesn't perform well, you're just going to burn it down anyway and get another quarterback when you could actually go get the best player on the board. I know a lot of people didn't like that pick because they're loaded at running back, but still, I do think that Atlanta surprises some people this year. KC is in the chat. Tyler sounds good to me. Gets to see his Chiefs open up because they are the Super Bowl defending champions. That game will be in Arrowhead. They'll probably drop a banner to start it, as tradition goes, and hopefully they'll break the streak. I don't know where it's at right now, but the Rams lost in pretty big fashion to the Bills. And then who opened the year after that? Well, it would have been who won after the Bucks? It was the Bucks And then it was the Bengals versus in the NFC. Dude, my brain is fried right now. How could I forget this? Who played in the Super Bowl against the Bengals? um, sorry guys. The Bengals played the guys. Help me out for a second, unless you guys are losing it too. The Bengals played. Oh God, why won't it even tell me? Who did the Bengals play in the Super Bowl 2 years ago? Oh, it was the Rams. Okay. So, man, that Super Bowl just didn't feel memorable to me. I don't know if it's just you guys, but to me, it wasn't super memorable. Like the Super Bowl we just had with the Eagles and the Chiefs, I don't I don't see myself ever forgetting that Super Bowl. That was a really good Super Bowl, and that was one of the cases where you did feel like two of the best teams were in it. Um, I still felt, in the AFC was a toss up. I thought maybe Cincinnati would have been a really good team also. The Bengals and Eagles would have been pretty nice, but I'm not mad about Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. He's fun to watch. And man, he put on a show. So I'm going to go down the week schedule all the way down to the hardest schedule. Okay. So, as you can see here, a lot of the teams that did not succeed last year, record wise, are getting the more favorable schedule. And then you have the teams that had a the harder schedule make it into the playoffs. There's exceptions on both ends. And I think for both sides of it, it could either be really good or really bad. Like if a bad team gets a really hard schedule, that sucks. But if you're a really good team and you got a cake schedule, right on. All right. So it goes New Orleans, Atlanta, Carolina, Indianapolis, Chicago Bears. Okay. Now we're at the fifth hardest schedule with the Bears. Houston Texans, Tennessee, Detroit, Jacksonville, 49ers. The 49ers getting a top 10 easy schedule is pretty brutal. So it says they're favored to win 11.3 games here. Okay. I would argue that that is too low. They retained all of their talent and they have a top 10 schedule, which means a lot of these games that you're going to see, you're going to know immediately who's going to win. I'm sure they will be Vegas's most favorited team next year. Okay. Detroit favored to win 9.9 games. Tennessee favored to win 7.4. So I'm giving you the current lines. The Texans 5.5. The Bears 7.5, which may be a little high. We'll see if they can put it together, but I would assume that they got a couple games thrown on top of maybe 5.5 because they have the fifth easiest schedule. The Colts at 6.5, Panthers 7.5, Atlanta 7.5. Now here's a really interesting stat. Because obviously the strength of schedule metrics that they use isn't perfect, but they try their hardest, I guess. And by the look of this, I can see that they're doing that. Now here's what's interesting, okay? Of the 10 teams predicted to have the hardest 2022 schedules, only two went to the playoffs. That was the Bengals and the Chiefs. So 1 year ago, when you get to 22 to 32, right? That we call that the 10 hardest schedules, only two teams out of all 10 went to the playoffs. So that tells you that being in the bottom 10 is not good news unless I would say you're the Bengals or Chiefs because you got two of the best quarterbacks in the league. Of the 7 teams that were forecasted to have losing records but were predicted to have an easier than average schedule, 5 went over their win totals. So, there were 7 teams last year that were projected to have a losing record, just like all of those teams I just mentioned. 7.5, 6.5, 5.5 were most of what we saw there. Okay, that's all of those are a losing schedule. Of all the teams last year, 7 that were predicted to have a losing record but had an easy schedule, 7 teams actually had more wins by the end than their projections. So when I look here at a team that has an easy schedule and is projected to have a losing season, I'm looking for 7 that are going to surprise. Okay. So out of Tennessee, Houston, Chicago, Indy, Carolina, they're saying that there's going to be 7 teams that are going to potentially, if last year's anomaly repeats, they're going to surprise. So I will say, in the bottom 10 of strength of schedule, that's where I'm looking for my surprise in a good way. And I look through here in Atlanta at 7.4. They might be one of the teams that pulls off, 9 wins. And Carolina, I believe, could get around 8 or 9 wins. Indianapolis, I think that people are really low on them right now. But 2 years ago, they were really solid, and if they can get Jonathan Taylor to get the Russian crown back on his head, I think the Colts could be one of those teams. Chicago winning more than 7.5. I just feel like they have so much that they needed to address. I understand DJ Moore is going to be great, but we still need to see Justin Fields take that next step where he has a better pocket presence. Houston Texans at 5.5 feels right, but I do think DeMeco Ryans is going to succeed as a coach. So if they win 6, I wouldn't be shocked, right? Tennessee at 7.5 is an interesting one. In a way, Tennessee feels like they are on a down trajectory. And you saw the reach for Will Levis, and it kind of shows that they're already planning for life after Ryan Tannehill. But I'll tell you this: the Jacksonville Jaguars having the 9th easiest schedule, and the Detroit Lions having the 8th easiest schedule. I do think both those teams are going to take advantage of beating up on lesser opponents. And it's ironic because they used to be the lesser opponents that you would get beat. And now here we are. This is I think this is a year where we're going to see a lot of things flip. There's going to be teams that are going to be the new bad team of the league. There's going to be teams that make that next step, like Jacksonville and Detroit. There's going to be teams that won a lot of games last year, like in Minnesota, pull back. And that's why we love predicting this stuff, because some of it does feel pretty easy to predict. Pittsburgh has the 11th easiest schedule, and right now they're sitting at 6.5. That's the current line. I think that they can win a couple games more than that. I can see them winning with Mike Tomlin. I'm just going to say they'll have a winning record. So that would be 9 wins, and that's 3 over the current line. So mark me down for the Steelers to get more than 6. The Green Bay Packers are at 7.5. Really hard to gauge the Green Bay Packers. They have the 12th easiest schedule, but at the same time, you have Jordan Love, and you don't have a ton of receivers. You do have Dobbs and Christian Watson, but it's just a lot of new, and we just have such a tiny sample size of that Sunday night game against the Eagles. We're going to have to just kind of wait and see. So I think 7.5 is just a very safe landing spot for the Packers. Tampa Bay, 13th easiest schedule. They're projected 6.5 wins. And guess what? The experts are agreeing, and they say 6.5 on their end too. Casey said Jacksonville and Detroit have better QB play than before, so that makes sense. Yeah, and I do think Trevor Lawrence is going to take a similar jump than we saw of Joe Burrow. Okay, Jack. I mean, Joe Burrow when he was drafted to the Bengals, everybody said the Bengals are a dumpster fire. They were like, if I were Joe Burrow, he had people in his ear telling him, "Do not let yourself get drafted to the Bengals. Hold out and play for a different team." And Joe Burrow was like, no, man, I'm going to go to the Bengals and change this organization. And only, he got injured his first year, but his second year takes him to the Super Bowl. Jacksonville had Urban Meyer, and everybody just kind of threw that away. It's almost like Joe Burrow, where he just got hurt. Um, it just, we didn't really know yet. And then the second year, we saw Jacksonville. Look, anytime you can come back from a 27-point deficit in a playoff game, mind you, your first playoff game, sign me up for that guy. Okay. He made a lot of mistakes, but so did Peyton Manning his first year. Had the rookie interception record. And I normally don't compare, people to Peyton Manning because Peyton Manning is elite and he's different. But Mel Kiper has the highest 4 quarterbacks he ever graded as John Elway. By the way, John Elway was the first quarterback ever to go to 5 Super Bowls. So John Elway was like the guy. Like people were Bronco fans because of John Elway, just like they're Chiefs fans now because of Patrick Mahomes. John Elway was the guy, and he ended up not wanting to play for the Giants, gets traded to the Broncos. The rest is history. Okay. So John Elway, this is Mel Kiper's highest 4 grades ever. Mel Kiper graded John Elway, Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck, and Trevor Siemian. Okay, that is very good company. Andrew Luck would have been a Hall of Fame quarterback, no questions asked. Okay. Peyton Manning, he's already a Hall of Famer. And then Trevor Lawrence, I believe, will be a Hall of Fame quarterback. So I don't know if I'm predicting a Super Bowl. I feel very, very inclined to predict that Jacksonville can make it to the Super Bowl, but I'm gonna hold off on it. And I'm gonna I'm gonna hold off on it. But I do think Jacksonville, they bring in Calvin Ridley into that offense. Calvin Ridley, I believe, is gonna have 1,500 to 1,800 receiving yards this season. And we're going to see Trevor Lawrence really take that step where just like Peyton Manning went to the crappy Colts and turned that whole organization around, this is Jacksonville's year to do it with the top 10 easiest schedule. That I think this is a recipe for a deep playoff run. And I believe one of the last 3 teams standing will be the Bengals, the Chiefs, and the Jaguars, right? And that's pretty impressive because 2 of those teams were the laughing stock of the league just 5 years ago. One of those teams had back-to-back first-round picks. Jacksonville had 1 win in their last 33 games at one point. Could you imagine 33 games and you get a 1 win? So I do think we kind of have to not just appreciate what Lauren T. Law has done, but understand that it's a process. And when you're losing one or when you're winning 1 out of your last 32, there's a lot of dirty hands. And it takes more than 1 year to just fix it. I'm actually really surprised Jacksonville did, even make it as far as they did last year. But I do see all those holes and all those people, and Doug Peterson is an amazing coach. I believe everyone's got clean hands, and it's time to make a deep push. San Francisco being at 10 is insane to me, and that's why I have San Francisco probably going to the NFC Championship to play the Eagles, and I do think it will be a rematch of last year's NFC Championship game because San Francisco is definitely going to win I believe, the most games of any team. So they're going to be a lock at number one because a team that is as good as the 49ers were last year should not have any business with it to have a top 10 easiest schedule. And I don't know if you guys were here when I was talking about point differential. And point differential last year is basically if you lose a game 20 to 40 or you win a game 20 to 40, you're plus 20. And it carries on every single week. So there's adding and subtracting. And then you can kind of figure out um, how many teams really dominated and how many teams got by the skin of their teeth. Like the Vikings had 12 win, their point differential was -3, which is the first time in history a team has won 12 games with a negative point differential, okay? But when you look at the 49ers, they were plus 173. That was number 1 in the league. And the only teams close were the Eagles at 133. Guys, that's a difference of 50 points. That is a huge difference. Buffalo was the closest team with 169. But the 49ers, that is the type of stat that tells you that this team is not even playing close games. They are destroying their competition. And now you're going to hand them a top 10 easiest schedule? Um I do think that is the recipe to sending the 49ers. I would say their best opportunity to win a Super Bowl will probably be this year. And KC says San Francisco was highest in the league, I think. Absolutely correct. And that's why I'm just shocked that they were given a toss up schedule. Because usually, like I read earlier, they try their hardest to make it fair, but this time not so much. Okay, moving on. We have Cleveland at 14. Cleveland at 14. Okay, that's a really interesting place to be because Deshaun Watson is very hard to gauge right now. And last year he was not impressive, but he also hadn't played in 2 years. So does he kind of get back into the swing of things and get back into being a top 10 quarterback in the league? If he does, then I say that the 9.3 is too low. I would say he would win more than 9.3 if you have Deshaun Watson playing at an elite level. But if he is worse or the same as he was this year, then I do think that Cleveland loses more than 8 games. So they would win less than 9 if he's terrible. So what did the odds makers do? They went right in the middle of if he plays really well or if he plays exactly the same. They went right there, said put a 9 on it, call it a day. And I think at this point, what else are you going to do? We do know that Kareem Hunt isn't there. He didn't have a great season last year, but for a long time, Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb were a two-headed monster. I don't think him leaving is doing Cleveland any favors. There's been some talks that he may re-sign with them, but there's also a link between Matthew Berry, who famously does fantasy football. He today linked Kareem Hunt with Denver and said, do not be surprised if he ends up in Denver, which makes sense because we have Javonte Williams, but we don't know when he's coming back. He had a serious injury. And he may not even be, he might be on a snap count at the end of the year. And, excuse me, who's going to be our guy? So that wouldn't shock me. But like I said, I think Cleveland at 9.3 is a very safe place at this point to put them with, a middle schedule. I personally would probably go 8.5 for right now, but Cincinnati right after them with 15. 15. Now, I'm telling you right now, these next two teams are going to win more than the current line. And Cincinnati at 11.5, Now, there's one thing about Cincinnati that I don't think is discussed enough, and that is that they start the season slow. Okay, they do start the season slow. 2 years ago, when they made the playoffs, I mean, made the Super Bowl run, it was a very lukewarm start to the season that included what is it? They beat Jacksonville barely. Jacksonville got off to I think like a 21-point lead, and there Cleveland was at like 1-5, or Cincinnati was like 1-5, and then something changed and turned around. They make it to the Super Bowl. They were a true underdog story last or 2 years ago. Last year, they started, I believe they were 1-3. So I do think you can add a couple losses just based on the fact that Cincinnati has shown that they have a problem starting fast. But at 15, how hard could these opponents be? They're going to be middle of the pack people. So they're going to be playing probably teams like Seattle, teams that are not elite, but they are definitely a team that can beat you if you are not showing up week one ready to go. So I said these next two teams I think are going to go over their current lines. So I think Cincinnati gets 12 wins. Now here's very, very, very surprising. This is probably one of the most surprising lines in this whole thing. Philadelphia Eagles are at 16. Usually when you win the Super Bowl, your strength of schedule goes they tune that up. Like if you look at where the Chiefs are ranked at, I believe they're at 31. There's only, let's see, 30. They're at 30, excuse me. So the fact that Philly is doing a lot of things that are strange, okay? Usually when you win a Super Bowl, you pick really late in the draft. So you don't have a sexy draft, right? It's like, oh, we got 4 guys, 5 guys, whatever it is. A lot of teams lately that win the Super Bowl or go to the Super Bowl don't even have a first round pick, like the Rams. But here's what the Eagles are doing that's kind of different. They have the best draft in the NFL with bringing in the 2 defensive tackles from Georgia. And then they bring in Keely Ringo. They brought in DeAndre Swift. Not many teams that go to the Super Bowl have the ability or privilege to have the best draft in the NFL. Like Texans, or not Texans. Yeah, the Texans are number 2 because they went CJ Stroud, and then right after that, they got Will Anderson Jr. Okay, but that's expected because they were the worst team in the NFL. So when you're the worst team in the NFL, yeah, normally unless you suck at drafting, you should be the team in the top 3. But Philly going to the Super Bowl and winning the most games in the league, how did they pull it off? And then you look at the schedule strength, Philly has the 16th strength of schedule. They're in the middle. Look at Kansas City. They're at 30. There's your Super Bowl treatment. Normally, you get the Super Bowl treatment. You're going to have a hard schedule. You're not going to have a solid draft. And that's what makes it so hard to repeat. But when I look at Philly right now, I'm wondering, is it going to be easier this year for them? I'm not just blowing smoke. I really mean that. I'm not just trying to be a fanboy. Obviously, I like Jalen Hurts, but I don't know how I could project any type of backslide for the Eagles this year. And last year, they had a point differential of plus 133. That was the 3rd best in the league, right underneath San Fran and Buffalo. And let's see 2022 strength of schedule. To see if they're having a easier or harder schedule, from last year to this year. Oh no, the Philadelphia Eagles had the 2nd easiest schedule last year. And that would make more sense of why they have them backsliding a little bit. Okay. Now, Philly was only projected to win 8.5 games last season. Now, this is that you couldn't be much more wrong than that. So, like, take these predictions with a grain of salt. One of these teams is going to surprise you. The Colts were supposed to win more games than the Eagles. That should just tell you right there how wrong it is. Jacksonville was only supposed to win 6.5. I don't. I look at these numbers and I see how flawed they are. They had Denver winning 10.5 games last year without Sean Payton. 10.5 games. I just okay, so I know it's all live on camera, but I'm willing to admit when new information has worked its way in. And the new information that I'm not changing my opinion, but I will double take is that Philly is not going to have the second easiest schedule. So maybe there's one or two losses they didn't have, and that's why they landed at 10.5. But here's what I'm willing to double down on. I think Philly can overcome. When you're plus 133, you're not barely winning. You're beating the living crap out of your opponents. And only Buffalo, San Francisco, and Philly were in this category where they were just destroying the competition. If their point differential was like, plus 20, I'd be like, oh, they played a lot of close games against weak opponents. Once those opponents get better, they're going to start losing a couple. I think that there's room for strength of opponent to increase without them being at risk of losing those games. So, look, 15, it's not. Philly should have the 28th or 29th hardest schedule in order to try to level the playing field. And I do think putting them at 16, you're going to get a lot more of the same as we got last year. Right after Philly, you got the Seattle Seahawks, favored to win 8.5 games. Where do the experts put them at? 8.5. So the line's at 8.5. The experts say 8.5. And I'm curious to know what you guys think about this one because Seattle was very surprising last year. Geno Smith making it to the Pro Bowl. It was a great story. It really all started week 1 when they beat the Broncos. And Seattle also, got beat by the Giants pretty good around week 4, week 5. I believe they won 9 games. They did make it to the playoffs, but they got destroyed by San Francisco for the 3rd time in the year. And they just were not, they were good enough to get into a shootout with Detroit. Remember that game? It was like 48-45. But, are you looking at the draft they just had, okay? Because 8.5 is not a lot of wins, but they were able to play competitively last year and get a wild card playoff spot. Yeah, the Packers had to lose that game against the Lions and things had to happen, but there they were. They made it in. So I believe they probably won, I think, 9 games last year. And now they've added the best cornerback in the draft and the best wide receiver in the draft. They added both of them. So I have a hard time thinking that they stay at 8.5. I'm going to go 9.5. Especially because 17th strength of schedule, 17th is not absurd. Last year, where were they at? 22. So their schedule is going to get easier. They were only favored to win 5.5 games last year. Okay, they exceeded their expectations with a harder schedule and less talent than they have this year. I'm looking for Seattle to boost those numbers up, not by a lot. Let me add one more win for the Seahawks. I'll take them at 9.5. Los Angeles Rams. And KC in the chat said, Seattle also had a lot of draft capital with the Wilson trade, so this should help him out this year. Yeah, and you saw that Seattle hit on all of those picks. Seattle's been great in the draft. You look at Kenneth Walker and the talent they brought in, not to mention Noah Fant, who was our first round pick at tight end 5 years ago. They were able to bring in Noah Fant. They brought in Shelby Harris, who was a solid player in the middle. I think Seattle has what it takes to be back in the playoffs next year. And I don't know if 8.5 wins gets you in the playoffs. So I agree with KC. I'm gonna pump that number up. Los Angeles Rams is an interesting one to try to figure out, not just for me, but I think for all NFL fans. Because the Rams were the worst team following a Super Bowl in Super Bowl history. No team has won the Super Bowl and then went into the next year and I believe won less than 6 games, which the Rams did. And then Matthew Stafford, it's like they got to a point where Stafford, had I think a neck injury, and they were just like, don't even play. Let's just not, because this year we could just chalk it up as an L, and let's not risk you at your age getting more hurt. They bring in Baker Mayfield. The whole thing was just kind of weird, but we knew that Sean McVay was a really good coach. But their offensive line was atrocious last year. And you're starting to see the fruit from the F them picks mentality harvest, and it's not good. So when you look at the Rams, you have to ask yourself 2 questions. Are they going to go deeper in that direction, or are they going to right their wrongs? And if you look at their draft, the first thing they did was get the best, let me see, I think it was the best tackle. It was offensive lineman right away, if I'm not mistaken. So they didn't have a first round pick, but they did have a second. Or did they even have a second, or was it the 3rd round that they made their first pick? Yeah, it was the 3rd round that they made their first pick. And in the 3rd round, they picked at number 14, and they got Byron Young, who is a defensive end. And they got Kobe Turner, who is another defensive tackle. So a little bit of them probably preparing for Aaron Donald's departure. He talked about retiring a couple times. Now, here it is. Their first pick was in the 2nd round, and they got Steve Avila, offensive guard. He was the number 1 in their position rankings. He's 6'4", 332 pounds. The Rams, they needed to address this. Their offensive line surrendered the 3rd most sacks last year, and that was a lot of the reason that the Rams weren't able to, compete. And most people, when you're on the board and your team is, had a very underwhelming year, there is a lot of pressure to make your fan base happy and go get these sexy picks. Go get Marvin Mims in the 3rd round out of Oklahoma. Go get yourself the best running back. Get Bijan Robinson instead of, like what Atlanta did. But at the same time, if you don't have an offensive line, you have nothing. Nothing. If you've seen Breaking Bad, when Walter tells Jesse, you get nothing. Nothing. That's exactly what I'm talking about. When you look at last year's worst teams in the league, it was the Bears, the Broncos, and the Rams. Those were 3 of the worst teams in the league last year. And the Bears and Broncos were tied for the most sacks in the NFL, and the Rams were right behind them. So, coincidence? No. If you don't have time to throw the ball, you don't have time. And my brother is in the chat, and Tyler actually was just at the Miami Heat game watching the Heat in a box seat beat the New York Knicks and that was a good game. Thanks for coming in here. But if you don't have time, as a quarterback, you are very limited on what you can do. So the Rams addressed that. Sean McVay's a great coach. They brought in a couple defensive tackles. They have the 18th rank. It's harder than it is easier. You're past 16, so we're getting towards the harder schedules. I think 7.5 is where, like, obviously it's the line. It's going to make a lot of sense. But this time, I don't know if I would go a little bit more or not. And Tyler said, just left Mike's. Jimmy Butler is the greatest Heat player of all time, still drunk. And I'm gonna still say D Wade. Actually, it's Shaquille O'Neal, but that's a controversial statement right there. But it shouldn't be. So yeah, the Rams are a toss up. And I'm going to say 7.5. Sure. Why not? Now, here's an interesting one. A lot of people have predicted that the New York Giants don't make the playoffs next year. They are at 19 and they're scheduled 8.5 wins. Okay. The Giants are going to have a tougher schedule than they had the year before. And I don't know how you guys feel about Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones definitely surprised a lot of people, but the way Dabble coached that team, he had them playing for each other, but there wasn't anything really sexy. The first 6 weeks of the season, we all agreed that it's Saquon Barkley. He's doing everything. And then towards the end of the year, they started giving him more leash, Daniel Jones, to let him start making some throws. And then he had a hell of a game against the Vikings in the playoffs. But here's why I am a little hesitant. And I know Bill's going to watch this later, but Jalen Hyatt, the wide receiver out of Tennessee, he was considered the biggest deep threat in the draft this year. And they got him in the second round. I like to watch other people that I respect, not just commentators. I'm talking about Hall of Famers. Steve Smith has a little segment where he talked about Jalen Hyatt, and he said the reason they said he was the biggest deep threat was because he was the fastest. And look, being fast is something you can't coach, and that's why it's something that is so desirable. But at the same time, Tennessee's offense was very, very, very unrealistic to what he's going to experience in the NFL. He only played 60 something. I don't remember. I think it was 62 amount of snaps his entire career at Tennessee in press coverage. Besides that, they were giving him 3, 4, 5. They were not pressing him. So you have the fastest guy. You're not being pressed. Tennessee's offense is none of this is probably going to translate well. He has a huge learning curve. And Steve Smith said his equivalent would be Knox, the fast receiver that played for for Chicago a couple years ago. One of the guys watching said, what about Ted Ginn? Because I see a lot of Ted Ginn in him. And Steve Smith was like, don't insult Ted Ginn like that. There's a reason Jalen Hyatt slipped into the second round and Ted Ginn was a first round pick. He's not very polished. He doesn't really sell the head fake. He has a lot of learning to do. At this point, Jalen Hyatt is just fast. And fast is good, but there's so much more to being a threat from the outside, the slot, than just being fast. So I am a little more down on this pick than I was because I believe Steve Smith knows way more than I do about a wide receiver. So I just, the Giants to me feel a little confusing as well. Like, I'll be honest about the ones that I'm not totally confident about. And I don't know if you guys are feeling like the Giants are going to really take another leap. They paid Daniel Jones. If you're looking at the contract, $40 million. I know Bill said there's like ways they can get out of it, but you only pay a guy that much money. if you believe that he's going to take another step. If he's going to stay the way he was last year, you don't pay him that much money. So does the step happen? We're gonna have to wait and see. This is the 19th hardest schedule. It's not going to be a cake schedule. There's going to be a lot of opponents in there that if you don't bring more than just a good game, you're going to find yourself beat. Because let's say the Giants are playing the Eagles and they are both having an average day, the Eagles are going to wipe the floor with them. There's too much talent. So the Giants are going to have to bring their best game often at 19. 8.5 is a pretty realistic spot. I'll keep them there. The Denver Broncos are next at 20. You guys know how I feel about the Denver Broncos. So let me just take one moment and try to, remove my biases. Let me put them aside. And I'll tell you one thing. The older I get, the more the more brutally honest with myself I'm becoming. It's either that or the more um depressed I'm getting. I can't tell which one it is. What I do know is that Denver hasn't been to the playoffs in 7 going on 8 years. That's a very long time. This is the longest time any team has ever gone without going to the playoffs after winning a Super Bowl. So, I guess part of me has gotten used to having high expectations and just having them, crumble down on me, okay? And I honestly, there was a year where I look back on it and I feel so dumb because I thought Drew Lock, he was a rookie and Denver put him in the last 5 games of the season, his rookie year, to see what we had there. And he went 4-1. He had a really good ending of the season. And then they signed Melvin Gordon and then they drafted Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler. And I went into that next year like, Denver's going to be good. And they weren't. It was just more of the same stuff, bad QB play. And then we watched the Teddy Bridgewater thing happen. And, I was like, it sucks going into a year and you have a bridge quarterback and you're supposed to really get behind and believe. At this point, look, this was my 6th year not seeing Denver, go to the playoffs. I just didn't have it in me to believe Teddy Bridgewater was going to get us to the playoffs. I still cheered. I still feel the same passion. But at this stage where we're going to sit here and predict, I don't have it in me to, be delusional anymore. I just kind of see the truth. Last year was an exception because Russell Wilson got traded to the Broncos, a guy that had more wins in his first 10 years as any quarterback in the history of the NFL. At this point, Russell Wilson was going to be a Hall of Famer, no doubt about it. So last year, I did it again, man. I did it again. I got excited, and I got shit on. Okay, Denver was a terrible team. They put a terrible product on the TV. They lost a lot of their games in a horrible fashion. And yet they had one of the best defense with San Francisco in the league. They were giving up. There was a point where we were at week 13. And if Denver had scored more than 16 points in the regulation, they would have been 14-1. So how bad offensively do you have to be to not be able to put up 16 points? So I'm big on the defense. Now the defense, there's dogs on defense. I mean, I feel really good about that defense. Patrick Surtain I think he's the best cornerback in the league. But if you push back against that, I'll give you top 5. We can move on. Justin Simmons has the 3rd most interceptions in the league since he was drafted. He's a ball hawk, great safety, really smart, leader on the team. Everyone can look to him, trust him. He's just a really good person, not just a football player, but the person. And then you look at the pass rush. They got rid of Bradley Chubb. I still have some questions about who's going to be getting after the pass rush, okay? Because they do have some guys on that that front that you probably know, like the what I keep forgetting this dude's name. Um because he barely played last season, and I'm trying to see where is it? So Jonathan Cooper, obviously we know, you may know who that is, but that's not who I'm talking about. Randy Gregory. He's got uh long dreads. He's a big dude. I think he's like 6'4", 6'5", and he just he was injured, and before he had a lot of substance abuse issues. So by the time Denver drafted him, it was kind of a good thing because he was suspended so much that a player at his age had, there wasn't as much tread on the tire, or there was more tread in the tire than you would expect. And we felt good about that. And when Randy Gregory was on the field, he is a problem. That's why the Cowboys wanted to re-sign him. The problem is he going to be able to stay on the field? But one thing we know, they had two solid linebackers with Josie Jewell and Alexander. So they're keeping the defense together. There was no defensive moves besides Draymond Jones, who went to Seattle of all places. And I think the defense is going to be great. So here I land, 20th hardest schedule in the league. I do not want to be delusional. Okay, so I am assuming that our offense is going to be bad. But when you have a defense that is putting you in a position where you need to score more than 16 points to win games, can the defense do that again? If they can, I do expect a different outcome from Sean Payton being the head coach of this football team. I thought last year was a complete dumpster fire. The organization was ran bad. Nobody knew really. There was no real leader on that team. Nathaniel Hackett was being friends with everybody, going to concerts with Russell and Sierra. Nathaniel Hackett was starstruck by Russ and Sierra. That's not what we need. We need a coach like Sean Payton. I feel that Denver will win all those games that they should have won last year with Sean Payton, but I just don't know if I have it in me to say it out loud again. They have to prove it to me, but right here they have Denver at 8.5. I'm going to go higher than that, and I'm comfortable with 9.5 right now. So I'm going to say Denver goes 9.5. New Orleans was the worst team in the NFL when Sean Payton got there. They were in the NFC Championship the next year. There are a few coaches out there. I mean, don't forget his last season with the Saints. He took the Saints to the playoffs with Jameis Winston, and I mean, that team had nobody. They were throwing in Michael Thomas couldn't play the whole year. I mean, Sean Payton can do a lot with a little, and I do believe when it comes to talent, there is a lot of talent on the team. So I am looking to see that manifest in W's, and I'm looking for the offense to just be on a completely different level this year. But I'm going to say 9.5 right now. And once OTA start, I can revisit that if I'm hearing some stuff that sounds really good. Arizona, harder schedule than Denver, and you could argue has a much worse team. Okay. Arizona doesn't have talent on that team. They had a couple players that were talented that they got rid of. DeAndre Hopkins, he's still looking for a home, but it is evident that they're going to trade DeAndre Hopkins. They had a really good defensive end that they drafted that they traded actually to Denver. Kyler Murray, this is kind of that year where if he sucks again, he's done. And they just paid him. We're like exactly a year ago, they made him the highest paid quarterback in the NFL. Isn't it funny how much can change in 1 year? But Arizona having the 21st hardest schedule, that's not doing them any favors. I do think Denver can stand up to the challenge at 20. I don't think Arizona has the bandwidth to stand up at 21 and fight. They're at 5.5 right now. I would put them at 5. Baltimore Ravens are at 22. That is like we're getting into the stretch now. We're at the 10 hardest schedules in the league. And KC said Sean Payton is a great start for the Broncos to build on. And he said, can you comment on where the Bills fit into the picture? I'm almost there, KC. Only a couple more to go. So the number 10 is 10 hardest now is the Baltimore Ravens. They keep Lamar Jackson. They're able to sign Odell Beckham Jr. They draft the wide receiver out of Boston College. They are doing all the right things, but is Lamar Jackson worth the money that they paid him? We're going to find out, and we're going to find out in a year that Baltimore is going to have a lot of games that are going to be difficult. I'm not sure what division they're playing this year because I don't have their opponent list in front of me, but Baltimore opponents, I bet you there's a lot of these games where you're going to go, ooh, that's tough. That's tough. That's tough. So their opponents this year, obviously you got the divisional opponents, which the Bengals, the Steelers, and the Browns. But then they got the Seahawks, the Rams, the Dolphins, the Lions. Dolphins and Lions are going to be good games. Seahawks will be a good game. I'll say the Colts and the Rams and Texans are probably dubs. And then their away opponents, Tennessee, Jacksonville is going to be tough. Arizona, that's a win. 49ers and Chargers. This is a 10-win team, I believe. 10-win team. So if 10 wins is worth the money, then he is. But if you're looking for him to lead his team to 12 wins, I don't think so. The Dallas Cowboys at 23. I do think the Dallas Cowboys are going to take a step back. They lost their offensive coordinator. And now he is the Chargers offensive coordinator. And Ezekiel Elliott, although he wasn't that impactful, him not being there is going to put a lot of pressure on Tony Pollard, where Tony Pollard used to just be the guy that went in, no pressure. And when he succeeded, it was just icing on the cake. Now it's his team. And unless Dallas finds a way to bring Zeke back on a cheaper deal, that's your guy. And he broke his leg in the playoff game against the 49ers. So I don't even know how healthy he's going to be. Kellen Moore going to the Chargers. I think Dallas takes a step back, but their schedule gets harder at 23. The Vikings at 24. This is an 8-win football team. An 8-win football team, in my opinion. They won 12 games with a negative 3-point differential. They're going to lose all those games now that they're playing the top 6, hardest schedule in the league. Kirk Cousins is Kirk Cousins. He's a solid starting quarterback, but he's not Patrick Mahomes. He's not even a top 7 quarterback. So I just don't think they have what it takes to get him over the hump. The New York Jets are at 25. Okay, so they are not going to have it easy, but they are going to have Aaron Rodgers. I'm inclined to say that this is going to be really well. This is going to go well for the Jets. One, we've all kind of seen this movie already with Brett Favre, and it worked out for Brett Favre. It depends on what your definition of success is. No, he didn't win a Super Bowl, but the Jets were relevant and they won a lot of games. And I was a young kid at the time, and I remember the Jets going from a bad team to an amazing team immediately. I do think that's what happens here. The fact that this Jets team was able to go 6-1, 7-1 with um, the dude with Wilson tells me that they are going to do amazing things this season now that they have Aaron Rodgers. So they got them at 9.5. I'm going to put them at 11.5. I'll add two. The Chargers are at 26. They did get a better offensive coordinator in Kellen Moore, but they still have Staley as their head coach, who I believe is the biggest problem in the building. They have him at 9.5. I think that's the perfect number for the Chargers to charger and continue to waste the elite talent of Justin Herbert. The Commanders are at 27. And when you see the Commanders, you don't expect to see them down here with, the Jets and the Chargers and the Cowboys, the Ravens. How did the Commanders get invited to this party? And I look, they're going to have Chase Young back. He's going to be there the whole season. But look at this division. I mean, you got the Giants, the Cowboys, and the Eagles. That's 6 games right there. I don't think that they win any of their divisional games. Maybe they can sneak the Giants once, but to me, that's already 6 losses right off the bat. So the best you're going after 6 losses is what, 7, 8-6. So having the Commanders at 7.5, I think is a little high. I think the Commanders are a 5-win team. The experts have them at 7. The Miami Dolphins at 28. They are, experts say, 9.4. The Vegas says 9.5. Well, it depends. It depends on Tua. Like we know he's going to miss some time, but is he going to play 14 or 15 games, or is he going to play 9 or 10 games? It's very important to know. We know that when Tua is there, that this team has the potential to be really great. But one of the things that we can't predict is Tua's health. And it feels just a little unethical to try to predict how many games he's going to miss. So I'm just going to say 9.5 seems perfect. The Las Vegas Raiders are at 7.5 going in. I think the Raiders are going to be one of the worst teams in the NFL, and I think Josh McDaniels is going to be fired. Bill is in the chat. What's going on, Bill? Happy to have you in here, and no worries. Just glad that you came. So, yeah, Tua, is he going to be able to stay healthy? We're going to have to find out. But I'll tell you this. Even if he does stay healthy, the NFL did no favors to the Dolphins. The 28th hardest schedule in the league is going to be an uphill road, and we don't even know if they have their quarterback on said road. So 9.5, I might even I agree with that just because there's so much talent on that team. I think they could squeak out wins. They almost beat Buffalo in the playoffs with a Canadian quarterback. I mean, what was that guy? Skylar Thompson, number 15. But yeah, 9.5. And then, like I said, we had the Raiders at 29, and I think that they get fired. Josh McDaniels is going to get fired here because he's a terrible coach. And then at number 30, we have the Kansas City Chiefs. The Kansas City Chiefs are at number 30. Well, the Kansas City Chiefs are I'm actually, I don't want to guess here. I want to see 2021 strength of schedule. Where was Kansas City last year? Kansas City, wow. Did you guys know that Kansas City last year had the 11th easiest schedule in the league? Unbelievable. The Giants were at 10, by the way, Bill. So Kansas City actually had a really easy schedule last year, and they're gonna balance out the the scale this year with the third hardest schedule in the league. And when I saw the Chiefs last year, right, they were the worst red zone passing defense in the league. They gave up a lot of points. They might be one of the worst defenses I remember that won a Super Bowl. And that was always my pushback against Kansas City last year. What I look, Patrick Mahomes is great, and you always have a chance when you have a generational talent under center. But the defense was not good, and I thought that they were able to win a lot of games that they had. Like Malik Willis is a perfect example. I think it was week 7 or 8. It's Sunday Night Football in Arrowhead. Tennessee loses Ryan Tannehill, so they start Malik Willis, who ends the day not even throwing for 100 yards passing. It was one of the worst quarterback performances I've ever seen. That game went to overtime. So I do think Kansas City needs to address a lot of things defensively, which they've done in the draft, but we need to see it work on paper now. 11.5 seems like a fair spot to put them because it's Patrick Mahomes. You're always going to get at least 10. You're always going to land in the double digits, you would think. And the Chargers, they still have Staley, so their division. We'll see what Denver is, but the division should be a little bit tougher this year. So, maybe knock one game there. I believe they won 12 last year, so now they have them kind of in the same spot. I'm going to make a bold prediction here, and I'm going to say they win 10 games. They go 10-7 next year. Number 31 is Buffalo, Casey. And I just realized I'm still sweating. I was playing basketball because the playoffs are on. And man, I was like dying out there. Full court basketball, just too old for that. Half court only from now on. Buffalo Bills at number 31. Buffalo is hard to gauge because they lost their defensive coordinator. They still have Josh Allen. They still have Stephon Diggs. And I believe they added a running back in the draft. And they added the best tight end, Kincaid. But they did lose their defensive coordinator. So their head coach is Sean McDermott is a defensive head coach. So I don't know how much that's going to pull back. And, if you're a team that has an offensive head coach, then your defensive coordinator, he's over the defense like completely. Now, it's a totally different thing if the head coach is a defensive head coach and he just lets the defensive coordinator run everything, but he's got eyes on the field and he is a huge voice in the defensive room. And now, that's why I think that the Bills might not be in too much trouble because they still have Sean McDermott who will be, looking out for that defense. But you cannot say that division didn't get better, okay? If Tua stays healthy, Aaron Rodgers stays healthy, New England is the only team that will ever be a spread that we can predict right now. New England will be favored to lose all of their divisional games unless the season starts and something really weird and sad, or, just unlucky happens to one of these teams. But with that said, that means that there's going to be a lot of toss-up games here. You play each opponent twice in your division. So that's 6 games. So you can minus 2 of them with the Patriots, and now you have 4 very difficult games, and we haven't even branched outside of your division. And if we do branch outside the division, it doesn't get easier because you have the hardest schedule, the second to hardest schedule in the league. So they have them at 10.5. I'm going to say 10 as well. I'm going to say Kansas City and Buffalo both with 10 wins. Doesn't matter. Kansas City and Buffalo, specifically Kansas City, they don't need to win 14 games. They really don't. All Kansas City needs to do is win double-digit games, and then they go into the playoffs. And once they're in the playoffs, Patrick Mahomes can beat anybody. He will never be, I think this was the first year that Patrick Mahomes was an underdog at home in his career. Do you know how ridiculous that stat is? And he won, by the way. So I don't think the books do that again. I do think Kansas City and Buffalo are going to pull back, but it's not going to change. Their goals are going to still be achievable in January. The hardest schedule in the league this year is the New England Patriots. And I don't know why. I really don't. When we looked at the easy schedules, or the teams that had it pretty easy, there were a couple teams that had an easy schedule that we were wondering, why are they there? Detroit and Jacksonville have a top 10 favorable schedule. And that's kind of, if you're a fan of those teams, that's a good thing. You want to, play weaker opponents. But if you're a weaker team and you're playing harder opponents, that's how you piss off an entire fan base. So not only does New England have to be the worst team in their division, as we've said numerous times, but now when they do branch off, no other team plays as many winning football teams as New England. Mac Jones, there's one or two ways you can look at it. You can say, no, there's no way that New England is going to even be relevant next year. Or you can say, Bill O'Brien may work out, coming back to New England. Bill Belichick's not, pretending that I don't know who the offensive coordinator is. Bill O'Brien's the OC. They drafted Christian Gonzalez, one of the best corners. Does something start meshing? Why would we start ruling out Bill Belichick now? Bill Belichick took Mac Jones as a rookie into the playoffs, and Mac Jones went to the Pro Bowl. Last year was a slip, but what we do as fans is we don't really change. We adjust after the fact. We do not, we are very reactionary as a community. We're not really active in getting ahead of trends. Okay. So when you look at New England losing Tom Brady, they had Cam Newton. That didn't work out well, and they missed the playoffs. Okay. And then the next season they get Mac Jones, and then they go to the playoffs. So we kind of, we balance out, but we're always using the last year's data. And then last year, the Patriots, they were very average. They were not, in my opinion, a bad team. They were not like those other teams like the Rams and the Broncos. They were an average team. And now they have added coaching and players, and I still think we're inclined to say they're going to suck because they have had 2 of their last 3 seasons not end in a playoff berth, and we're just reacting. But my job is to be predicting. I do think in a normal case, a normal scenario, everything that I just said would lead me to believe that the Patriots can win 9 games moving forward. They can win 9 games next season, but they do have the hardest division, in my opinion. And now you add on the hardest schedule. It just seems like, it seems like right when they could have made their way out, everything got harder. It's like once you finally learn how to beat the game, and then you realize that there's a whole nother level. Are they going to be ready for it? I'm not sure, but at 7.5 is what Vegas thinks about the Patriots. And I'm going to give an extra 0.5 here because Bill Belichick is Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick will never have his team go out there and get embarrassed. It doesn't matter what division he's in. Okay. So I'm going to say New England going 8-9 is where I stand. The reason they pick 7.5 is because they want you to have to pick. Do they go 7-8? Do they go, or do they go what, 9-7? No, now it's all changed. 9-8, or do they go 8-9? That's kind of what you have to pick. Actually, it's 8-9, or what would it be? 6-6. Wow, this is crazy. Sorry, I never thought about this. So if a team is at 7.5, then you would say, if you went under, you'd say 7 games is how much they win. So they would go 7-10, or you have to say 8-9. Okay. So if I have to choose between one of those, I'm gonna go with the 8-9 selection because of Bill Belichick. Now, I can understand that although we are trying not to just be reactionary, I may be also having preconceived biases because New England was good for most of my life. Um, and maybe times are changing, and you know, maybe Bill Belichick will still have his team ready, like Mike Tomlin. They after Big Ben retired, he still had a winning season. Is Mike Tomlin capable of something that Bill Belichick isn't? I don't know. We spent our whole life thinking that the the Patriots were good because of Bill Belichick, and then Tom Brady left and won a Super Bowl, and now we're all kind of just standing by, waiting to see what who are the Patriots, who are the Patriots, and nothing like a 30-second hardest schedule in the league on a year where they need to make the playoffs or some serious changes are coming. Nothing like a year like that to prove themselves. Um, Bill said they could pull a Giants Commanders and tie. That's yeah. I that would but who would they tie with? That would be the kicker. Um, they could tie with Miami. That's who they would tie with because I did say Miami at 9.5 made a lot of sense because we just don't know about Tua. And then Casey said, "Don't we hate ties though?" Yes, we do. We hate ties. HATE. I think it's the dumbest rule in the NFL. And um, a little bit of news. The schedule will be released on Thursday, and we're going to do an episode for the schedule release, and I'm excited for that. Um, that is one of my favorite days of the off season. Arguably, I'll say I like it just as much as the draft. A lot of people don't like it that much. I freaking love it. It's going to be a long episode Thursday, but we are going to break down every single game, including the openers and stuff like that. We're going to go in order from week one, and we're going to move on. And then the following week, we're going to play with it, wins, losses, etc. So, Kareem Jackson, who was drafted in the first round as a safety, played for the Houston Texans for a while. He spent the last 4 seasons in Denver, usually re-upping a 1-year deal every time because he's 37 years old, but he also had the most tackles last season that he had in any season. So he's old, but his play hasn't he hasn't regressed at all. So Denver, I assume he wanted to make real money, so Denver told him to go test out the free agent market, and Denver signed him today on another 1-year contract, bringing K-Jack back on the team. He's one of the leaders on that team. So Denver bringing back Kareem Jackson is some news. And also for you, Bill, Barry, the guy that runs the fantasy football show, he has said don't be surprised if Kareem Hunt ends up in Denver. He's hearing some chatter. And also, Bill, I'll tell you now, you can also rewind it and watch this. There have been leaks, okay? And one of those is that on Black Friday, the Giants are going to play the Eagles on Thursday Night Football, premiering on Amazon Prime. We also know that the Patriots are playing the who was it? The Patriots and hold on, I'll pull it up right now. Like I said, the leaks have started. So the teams have accidentally, the NFL has done a much better job this year controlling the leaks. But the problem is Germany has posted on their website that this team's coming to town. I think Tennessee, Jacksonville, and then there's one more team. And then the Germany game is the Saints and the Patriots. That's who it is. So the Saints playing the Patriots sometime in November. So I just wanted to give you those. And then if I hear any leaks, I will make a short about it. So if you guys are out there searching for schedule leaks and stuff like that, look no further than, this YouTube channel. We're going to make a short about it every time we hear about it. And then Thursday, we are not going to do trivia. We are going to do the schedule release. And obviously, I would have told you about that last week if I had known. But the NFL told us 7 hours ago, well, 9 hours ago now, that that's coming up on Thursday. So that's going to be a whole special. And I'm looking forward to it. And then I was thinking on Friday, we can do the game where we watch an older game. So basically what I'll do is I will have my screen in this type of format, or it'll be, something like this. No, it'd be like this. No, like basically I'll be smaller and the actual game we're watching will be bigger. And we can do a live watch and just kick back and watch an old game. So I'm going to put a vote up to make a poll on which game it should be. I'm down to a couple. Ideally, I want it to be a game where I don't know who wins. So if we could all find just a random game, like, something that should be good, but it's been long enough. Like, let's say the Patriots versus the Colts in 2004, where we know that, it was a great game because Brady was playing Manning, but we don't remember who won that one. And then no spoilers, hopefully, come in. But I would like to do something fun like that and then do that historical game with the Giants and Redskins, now Commanders. I know Bill doesn't want to do that because that was the highest scoring game in NFL history, and I don't want to hurt your feelings. But if you guys have any suggestions, maybe a game that we've forgotten about. I think 2 years ago, there was a really good Monday night game with the Rams and Ravens. I think it was the Browns and the Ravens, and it was a high-scoring shootout. Something super fun, but we are going to be doing our Wednesday edition, Only Football with Kyle, coming up. I'm sure there will be more leaks and more news then, and then gearing up for our big reveal Thursday. And I'm going to be starting that at 7 p.m. West Coast time. So it'll be 9 p.m. if you live in Chicago, and that will be 10 p.m. if you live in Florida, New York, East Coast time zone, and 8 p.m. if you live in Colorado. I didn't forget about you, Colorado. But that's all I got for today. Bill said, I'm actually down for it. And he goes, disappointing the Germans, huh? Yeah, a very underwhelming game makes its way overseas once again. I don't know why we can't give them a real game. Like, let's get the Bengals and Chiefs in Germany. Wouldn't that be a show? But no, we're giving them the Jaguars and Broncos again. If you guys are watching this after this has released, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you for helping us grow. We're over 300 subscribers. I can't believe I'm saying that. It was a year ago that we had our first listener come into this podcast and listen. Just one. And it just means a lot to see how much we've grown. And, you guys are a huge part of that. So I'm always going to say thank you for that. And everyone else, this is a great family to join. You see Casey comes in immediately with a hey, Bill, and then Bill right back at him with the hello, Casey. This is a family in here. So if you are cool, come join it. And then Bill said, oh, hey, you hit 300 recently. Yep. And yeah, that's all you guys. So thank you guys. I will see you in 2 days. And until then, go Broncos.